Well, it's 11:02, so we better get started. It's great to see all of you virtually here in 2021. We missed meeting with you last month. This is the first in 2021 of our Determining Decades series, and we're returning to the places that we protect. We have a really special program for you today. It's going to focus on the Cosumnes River Preserve. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm Elizabeth Harvey Roberts, and I'm the Chief Development Officer for the California chapter of the Nature Conservancy. I came here 11 years ago, and the first preserve that I visited was the Cosumnes River Preserve. And I had such a wonderful time learning about sandhill cranes and all of the other wonderful waterfowl that visit the preserve, and also watching the crane, what we call the crane down at Staten Island. And it gave me a really wonderful perspective on Mount Diablo. I live here in Danville, California, and at the foot of the mountain, but I had never seen it from the other side. And it's just a beautiful sunset view. I think the opening slide gave us a little bit of a picture of what that looks like. So thank you so much. Our special guest today is Rod Kelsey. He is the Associate Director of our California Water Program. He's a very special expert in birds of all kinds, and he has so much to share with us, and there will be great opportunity for you to ask him questions. So use the Q&A chat while the program's going on and also afterwards, and we will try to get to as many of your questions as we can. And please stick with us after the program's over. There are several special announcements that I don't want you to miss. So I will be giving those to you at the end. And with that, I think we're also going to do a special poll before I turn it over to Rod. So I wanted to ask all of you, have you visited the Cosumnes River Preserve before? And do you know where it is? So anyway, if you would answer that question right now, and I can share the results with you. Okay. So yes, 50% of you have visited, so that's wonderful. 21% of you say no, but 30% almost say yes, no, you haven't visited, but you'd love to visit. So all that's good information, and I imagine that more of you will want to visit at the end of this presentation, because I think you'll see what a special place it is. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rod Kelsey. Rod, thank you so much, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see everybody. Thank you so much for attending. We're really grateful for such an enthusiastic response to this. And as Liz said, I'm with the water program here at the Nature Conservancy, and I lead our strategy focused on wildlife-friendly and sustainable agriculture here in California. And I'm excited to share with you a view into the past, as well as a vision of the future of our work that's really been built off the Cosumnes River Preserve. And I'm really glad to see that over half of you have visited. But let me take you on a little journey first. So imagine this: you're with your family, you're doing a cross-country trip across the United States, and you're on one of those long, pretty desolate roads in the middle of the country. And you're getting pretty hungry. It's getting late in the day, and you really need a place to rest, and the red light and your fuel gauge just went on. But you've done this journey before. Your family's made the trip several times, and you're pretty certain around the next corner you're going to find what you need: some gas, some food, and maybe a place to rest your head to prepare for the rest of the journey. But every time you turn the corner, closed. Every gas station shuttered, no restaurants open, every hotel closed. And now you're beginning to really get worried. And you look to your family and ask, what do we do now? I paint this picture for you because this is what millions of migratory birds experience every year, twice a year, as they travel along these ancestral, ingrained, ancient pathways between and across every continent on the globe. And birds like this sandpiper seen here, they breed in northern Canada and northern Alaska in the open tundra. And every year they make the journey to their wintering homes as far away as South America, traveling well over 10,000 miles each year. And this is a bird that stands no more than 8 inches tall, weighs a couple ounces, which is no more than your typical apple. And the only way that they can survive a journey like that is if they find abundant food and safe places to rest along the way. But unfortunately, they're not finding what they need. And the reason is that we've turned most of their rest stops into our homes, our farms, and our factories. And the cost is that birds like this are declining year after year after year as they don't find what they need, and many of them die along the way. And this is not unique to this bird. In North America, over the last 50 years, we've lost the equivalent of nearly half the world's human population. That's 3 billion birds lost in 50 years. And this is emblematic of a broader, more existential threat that's occurring on the major flyways all across the globe, including the major flyways that you can see in the Americas here. Breaking down the interconnected web of nature and the systems on which we depend for a beautiful and habitable planet. So I hope you agree this is something worth stopping. And we live in one of these great migrations, one of these great pathways, the Pacific Flyway, which stretches from Siberia to the tip of South America, as seen on the left side of this map. And California plays a very pivotal role in that flyway. In fact, it's one of the linchpins along the flyway. The coastlines of California and the Great Central Valley, which you can see here, have for millennia provided those vital resting stops for these birds as they make their annual journeys. But turning this Central Valley of California into one of the world's most intensively cultivated landscapes and really a breadbasket for the world has come at a cost. This landscape once had 3 million acres of a mosaic of wetlands throughout the valley that provided a home and a resting place for perhaps 100 million or more birds every year. And now most of those wetlands have been lost. We only have about 5% of them. And the result is that only 10 million birds now visit the valley. That's 90% loss of these bird populations. That's a devastation to these bird populations. But we can't go back to 3 million acres of wetlands. So what can we do? So imagine a different future, a more abundant future, one in which there's a rich mosaic of wetlands and riverine forests embedded in a vibrant agricultural landscape. And this more hopeful future is not an unrealistic dream. In fact, it's closer than you might think. And this is the kind of work that the Nature Conservancy for the last 60 years has been doing to tackle challenges like this. And in fact, the work that we've done began in the Central Valley over 3 decades ago, building and saving some of the last great natural habitats in the valley. And the crown jewel in that legacy is the Cosumnes River Preserve. This is home to some of the last remaining old growth, majestic stands of valley oak forest in the Central Valley, and home to the only river left on the west side of the Sierra Nevada that's undammed, allowing it to overflood its banks all along the way, creating wetlands and habitat for a myriad of species. And it's also this vital buffer between the growing cities of Elk Grove to the north and Stockton to the south, providing vital open space for the people in those communities. And it's also been this learning laboratory for us all of these years. We've learned the power of nature and its power to heal itself. And we actually learned this at first by accident. A number of years ago, one of the artificial levees that was there to hem in the river actually broke, flooding the surrounding landscape. And as we watched this, we realized that it was sowing its own seeds of restoration. And we really took that lesson to heart, because what we wanted to do is help nature do its own work. And so we began actually opening up intentionally some other sections of levee to let the river do its work, culminating in the last most recent project of that type seen here in this picture, which was a 1,000-acre floodplain restoration where we removed almost 1,000 feet of levee. And it's now evolving into one of the preserve's largest floodplain wetlands and forests, which is really exciting. And we're loving watching this thing evolve over time. But the other thing we also learned at the Cosumnes River Preserve is that agriculture has to be part of the solution. We simply can't buy and restore our way back to everything that was lost. It'd be too expensive. But agricultural lands can provide a vital home for birds like that sandpiper and other things. All those birds need really are shallowly flooded places where they can move around and find food, see predators when they're approaching, and find a nice, safe place on the margins to rest. And so we began adding to the conservation opportunities in the Cosumnes by adding agricultural easements on bird-friendly crops like rice and corn and wheat, and expanding on the potential for agricultural lands to be part of the healthy mosaic. And we doubled down on that vision when in 2001, we purchased Staten Island, a 9,000-acre working farm in the middle of the Delta as our westernmost outpost for the Cosumnes River Preserve. And this is a place where saving sandhill cranes became an important part of our work. So I'm going to switch to a video right now and let the team tell you the story.
I have the most wonderful job in the world. I get to come out in places like this and manage wildlife-friendly agriculture. I work with farmers, I work with scientists, and we create habitat and we manage habitat. You know, one of the biggest challenges in conservation is migration. You know, as a Nature Conservancy, we're used to buying these beautiful places and preserving them forever. Perpetuity, we like to say. And so finding places like Staten where you could have agriculture and also bird habitat. And so this idea of wildlife-friendly farming, then it's a win-win, and that's what we're looking for.
This place transforms from a very productive cultural operation to an amazing mosaic of habitats that are incredibly supportive of biodiversity.
While Staten Island is very important, it's an integral piece of the Delta ecosystem, we really need to understand what's going on across the landscape in order to do the most we can with our conservation action.
The Delta is where all these rivers from the Central Valley come into and eventually go out under the Golden Gate Bridge. Staten Island in the Central Valley of California is part of the Pacific Flyway. And so these birds are coming here in the winter after they've been in Alaska, Oregon, Washington, and so they overwinter here.
Staten Island is a living laboratory, and we try to encourage as many different researchers as possible to utilize the property.
The farmers benefiting because they're flooding their corn in order to get decomposition for the following year. And at the same time, you're supporting thousands, tens of thousands of birds on that same property.
The Sandhill Crane Festival promotes understanding of cranes and the need to protect their environment. Our Crane Festival brings in more people to Lodi than any other event. What you learn to love is what you learn to protect. To see cranes is an emotional experience, it's not just an intellectual experience.
Finding the solution to climate change, finding a solution to sandhill cranes, and finding a solution to agriculture. This is the lab where it's going on. And so this is really an exciting time and period to be in the Delta and part of Staten Island.
So that's really exciting work. I'm inspired by it every time I go out there and work with that team. And that work continues today. And in fact, Staten is actually even more becoming a model and a learning laboratory for us as we demonstrate new, more sustainable ways to not only provide for the birds in the Delta, but actually solve some really existential challenges for the Delta overall, which I'll come back to in a moment. And so, but one farm in the Delta and even the whole Cosumnes River Preserve is clearly not enough, particularly when you're thinking about the Pacific Flyway. So in 2008, we formed a partnership called the Migratory Bird Conservation Partnership with Point Blue Conservation Science in Audubon, California, to bring the kinds of solutions we were demonstrating in the Cosumnes to a much bigger stage. And for many years, we focused on many of the traditional conservation options at our disposal. For example, more acquisition of land to protect key pieces and conservation easements on bird-friendly farms, as well as government programs that actually provide financial incentives for farmers to practice bird-friendly farming. And all of these are really important options, and we continue to influence and build upon those and use them. But the fact is that those options have some inherent limitations, not least of which are their cost and efficiency in getting them on the ground. And so a creative team at the Conservancy began thinking about, what if we had a more nimble, more easily applied way to rent the habitat when the birds need it? One that could bring the best available science to make sure we're pinpointing where to deliver the habitat and when to deliver it to get the most value. And so over the course of less than a year, in fact, the team brought innovative science and novel thinking to this decades-old problem. And out of that process emerged bird returns, this private marketplace that enables us to rent habitat at farms just when and where the birds need it most. Think Airbnb for birds. And the way this works is conceptually pretty simple. First, we needed to understand where and when do we need to deliver the habitat to get the most value. And to do that, we partnered with NASA and Point Blue to create a tool that uses satellite imagery to tell us where there is flooded habitat in the valley every 2 weeks of the year, and to be able to compare how does it look in drought years versus heavy rainfall years. And we also partnered with Cornell University and the Lab of Ornithology to use their massive and growing database of crowdsourced bird observations, which many of you may use, to create models that allow us to predict where the birds we're most concerned about are most abundant throughout the year. And combine these allow us to pinpoint where and when to deliver habitat. And then we created an online auction system that would enable farmers to go online and tell us in a given year how much they would need to get paid to prepare their fields and shallowly flood them at just the right times. And then we could select from those bids using the science those that provide the most return on the investment. In other words, the greatest habitat value per dollar. And that's how we could create these rental pop-up wetlands throughout the landscape. And we ran our first auction in 2014, selecting 36 farmers to deliver 9,000 acres of seasonal habitat for these birds. And since then, we've run 8 more auctions, delivering over 60,000 acres of seasonal habitat and working with over 100 farmers. And we've really shown the value of this habitat. We actually see 2 to 5 times more birds on the bird returns fields than we do nearby fields that aren't implementing these practices. And that was particularly important during the last drought when the bird returns fields were most of the habitat that was available in the Sacramento Valley. And we've also shown that this mode of renting habitat can be 25 times cheaper than buying land over time. So a great success by many measures, and it's super promising, right? Well, it is, certainly, but this is still nowhere near set up to deliver the amount of habitat that these birds need for California, let alone the Flyway. So we're in a really important new phase of our work right now that's focused on scaling these solutions to the scale that they're really needed. And one of the things we're doing is reimagining how we deploy bird returns. What if we were to deploy it as a network of marketplaces, crowdsource the tools and systems that we've created to regional partners who can run their own marketplace that's tailored to their own needs and can deliver for their community. That way we can spread the load and have them benefiting in ways that are most suitable for them. Also, we're deliberately capitalizing on the other benefits that flooding these farmlands can create for the farmers and their communities. And in particular, we're focused on the potential of this kind of flooding to replenish our depleted groundwater stores. This is really critical because the incredible breadbasket that we've created in the Central Valley has been fueled in part by decades of unregulated mining of the freshwater aquifers under our feet. Aquifers that once were maybe a couple feet below the surface, or maybe even at the surface in some places, are actually hundreds of feet below the ground now in many places. And these are our largest, most cost-effective freshwater storage reservoirs in California, and are going to be critical for the water security of California going forward. And we know we can actually replenish those aquifers while delivering first-class bird habitat. And we know that because we're showing it. Over the last year, we've been working with farmers and scientists to flood these fields and actually measure how much water we can put back in the ground, while also looking at how the birds are responding to the habitat with really promising results. And we're building bigger partnerships around that kind of effort. So we're really excited about that work. And the other great example brings us all the way back to Staten Island. The Delta is one of California's most productive agricultural landscapes. And it's actually the hub of our water supply. Many of you may know this. 25 million people and 3 million acres of agriculture get their water through the Delta. But the Delta has a major problem. Farming the kinds of soils that are in the Delta causes the land to sink below sea level. And this is increasing the chances of catastrophic floods that would flood some of the islands, and in the process compromise the water supply infrastructure of California. And the other problem is that farming these kinds of soils create a tremendous amount of greenhouse gases. And because these soils are different, and it's more than most other agricultural lands in the state. And so here too, Staten is now proving itself as a key demonstration where we're demonstrating new, more sustainable ways to farm in the Delta that are a mosaic of different land uses that can make the Delta more carbon neutral and more resilient over time. So we're really excited about that as going forward. And so this is really coming full circle. What we started at Cosumnes decades ago paved the path for a program like Bird Returns. And then we were able to turn that work and bring it back to the Cosumnes as a further testing ground for many of the solutions we're trying to take to scale, so that we can actually demonstrate how nature and people can thrive together. And generations from now, our grandchildren can visit the Central Valley and not only witness one of the world's most sustainable breadbaskets, but actually a thriving community of birds living within and benefiting from a mosaic of vibrant farms and wetlands. So really excited about this work. And if you want to learn more, we'll be following up with links to our website and these stories. And if you're interested in supporting this next new phase of our work, please reach out anytime. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rod. It was great to hear this presentation. And now we're ready to get into the questions and answers. So thank you so much for those who have chatted in or put your questions in the Q&A function. We will go through those, and please, I encourage you to send along any others you have. If we don't have the chance to get to them today, we will make sure to, Rod will make sure to write answers to your questions, and we'll send those to you in about a week. So they will not go unnoticed. All right, so Linda and Randy are asking, when's the best time to visit the Cosumnes River Preserve? And when can we see the sandhill cranes on Staten Island? When can we see them performing their mating dance?
Yeah, so I'm sorry to say we're right at the tail end right now of crane season at Staten Island and at the Cosumnes River overall. Just last week, I saw a big group of 40 flying over, headed north to their breeding grounds as far away as Siberia. But so they start arriving in September. They leave around March, and the peak time is November, December, January. Great time to go visit the preserve. The preserve is a great place to visit all year round. There's all kinds of other things. There's river otters and all kinds of stuff. So I would go then, and Staten Island is publicly accessible. You can go there anytime you want during the day and watch the crane down, as Liz said earlier.
Excellent. And thank you for sharing those photos of Mount Diablo. So let's see, who is asking this question? Amira's asking, I listened to a presentation by Matthew Allhouse regarding the Audubon Society's work on bird-friendly farming, which they're working on with TNC, and their meat certification program. It's a great idea, though I realize we should be moving away from meat. Although I did learn they were teaming with you, can you give more background on the work TNC has been doing with it and plans for more? I'm always inspired when NGOs work together. Thank you.
Yeah. So the Migratory Bird Conservation Partnership with Audubon and Point Blue is 11 years young and still going strong. And so we continue to partner on all of this stuff. And in fact, they're a key partner in how we bring bird returns to the rest of the valley and maybe the world. Their conservation ranching program, which I'm familiar with, is not something we're directly participating with them in, but we advise on, and when there's policy or other things that need to happen, we're broadly supportive of that. And I used to work for Audubon, so I'm really familiar with a bunch of their work, and it's really cool stuff.
Thank you. And I should just mention, and there's a couple people that are joining us today that actually volunteer for the Cosumnes River Preserve. We have a number of partners there. TNC did not do this alone. So both the BLM and Ducks Unlimited, and I'm sure there are other partners that I'm just forgetting right now, but we do encourage you to go visit, and there's great signage. There's a wonderful program for school children when COVID's not in place. And it's just a really very easily accessed preserve for people that have any physical limitations, as well as people of any age. So putting in a plug for that. Let's see, Katie is asking, have farmers seen the benefit of bringing these birds to the Cosumnes in Staten Island? Are they excited to work with you to protect these birds?
Yeah, many of them are. I think there's some we still need to convince. So Staten is owned entirely and managed by the Conservancy, but we've had a lot of interaction with and partnership with some of the farmers on surrounding islands. And then throughout the valley. And the California Rice Commission in particular is a close partner of ours, and we work with rice farmers throughout the valley. And so next time you're thinking about having a nice bowl of rice, think about those farmers and the role they're playing in saving the Pacific Flyway. So yeah, very close. The farming communities are close partners, but we have some work to do to bring it to all farms.
Yeah. And I would also put in a plug for some of our partners that are working more on fish related issues, such as California trout. There are some rice farmers and other types of farmers in the valley that are flooding fields on behalf of salmon too, little fry. So there's a lot of real multi-benefits to all of this work. And again, lots of great partners doing similar things. We're all in this together. Okay, Rick, when is the Sandhill Crane Festival, and when are the best times to go and see and photograph migratory birds in significant numbers? I'm a wildlife photographer, lately specializing in birds.
Yeah, I believe the festival is in December every year, but right around the peak of the cranes, and that is, one of the best times at Staten or some of the other preserves, and as Liz said, a bunch of our partners' properties in and around the preserve and the region. That's the best time because the abundance of birds that are easily seen and spectacular are all seen there. Great time to go taking photographs.
Okay. And Hank, hello, Hank. Good to see that you're here. Can you describe what TNC is doing in the San Joaquin Valley?
Yes. So we've had a involvement in the San Joaquin Valley for many years, and our latest work is focused on something related to the groundwater work I just mentioned, which is part of what's going on is a groundwater law was put in place in California that's now going to regulate the use of groundwater to get us to a more sustainable place. And the consequence of that is that a bunch of agricultural land is going to come out of production permanently just to balance agricultural demand with water supply. And what we're looking at that as is it's a huge opportunity to actually strategically restore some of those retired agricultural lands to create new reserves for upland communities of some of the most endangered plant and animal communities in the country. So we're heavily focused on that. And we actually have a book coming out in early April all about that.
And thank you. I was going to put in a plug at the end, but I'll just do it now since we're on the topic. Yes, Rod is an author along with a couple of his fellow staff people, and they have a book coming out about rewilding retired farmland in the San Joaquin. And so there will be a webinar about that launch and just to explain the work, and we will get you that information as part of the follow-up to this webinar. So hope you can join us there. It's in March, I think the 18th. Okay, Yvonne, in the proposed increased water exportation to Southern California, is it a threat to this project?
No, I wouldn't characterize as much. Most of the water, 80% of the water that gets used and managed in California goes to agriculture. And there's certainly a bunch of water makes its way to Southern California, but they've made their own improvements in efficiency and storage locally. So that's not the big issue in terms of water supply.
Okay, thank you. Eric, is the bird population along the Pacific Flyway still in decline or has it stabilized?
It's still in decline, except one note on what I said earlier about all those birds being lost. There's 3 groups of birds in North America that have stayed steady or increased over the last 5 decades. And among those are waterfowl, ducks and geese. And that's in part because of the amazing work that partners like Ducks Unlimited and California Waterfowl Association and others have created in creating restored wetlands, replacing some of what's been lost. And so they've actually done quite well, also with agriculture. It's the shorebirds like the one I showed, and a whole bunch of land birds that depend on our oak forests and our river forests that are really declining rapidly. And shorebirds are among the most rapidly declining of bird groups, not just here, but globally.
That's sad. Jeannie, what about pesticides in the soil? So I think we're talking about what we do at Staten Island and other places.
Yeah, sorry, you broke up just briefly. What was the question again?
Oh, she's asking about pesticides in the soil.
Yeah, so there's no evidence that we've come across that there's a major acute or chronic problem created for the birds. In that, actually, one of the bigger problems is mercury that's been left over from the legacy of mining in the Sierra Nevada, which can become available in the soil and end up in the little invertebrates and things that these birds eat. So that's an issue that we pay attention to and people have addressed, but we're not at the moment that concerned about the pesticides on the birds per se.
Okay, thank you. Dale is asking, does Bird Returns have application for tricolored blackbird colonies?
Yes, I think it does. Audubon runs a great tricolored blackbird program, which I used to be involved with, and they still do work with farmers to essentially pay them to delay harvest, where the tricolored blackbirds, as it sounds like are doing that. And I think you could. It's just not quite as amenable because there's only a few farmers and running an auction and a marketplace. There's probably only 3 farmers out there that have this problem of tricolored blackbirds on their farm. So in that case, it's better just go take care of that problem.
Okay. Chalky is asking, any plans to expand to Southern California and specifically the Santa Ana River?
This work, not per se, but we have an amazing team in Southern California working on connectivity issues and river conservation and other things down in those landscapes. So the Bird Returns model and some of this work around water and agriculture, we haven't yet taken it to that scale, but there are places like Salinas, which is a heavy agricultural landscape and so forth, where this will have a lot of application.
Okay. Jeffrey, how many acres does the preserve currently contain, and what plans, if any, does TNC have to create additional similar preserves in the Sacramento or San Joaquin River systems?
Yeah, so it's about 50,000 acres of the preserve, and as Liz highlighted that I didn't say and should have, is it's really a partnership of many partners, including Department of Fish and Wildlife and BLM and Ducks Unlimited and others. And it's slowed down. There's not a lot of expansion of the preserve, although all of the partners are keeping their eye on important opportunities. And I would say our biggest moves to create new preserves, one is in the Tehachapi Mountains, where we've been actively working to build out a protected network of lands, some of which may go to state parks, which is this vital connectivity corridor in the Southern Sierra. And the work we just mentioned in the San Joaquin Valley of strategically retiring and restoring agricultural lands, we hope will end up in big new reserves.
Thank you. Let's see, Laura, any special status birds prioritized in the rental lands program?
There aren't very many of these shorebirds that are listed special status, as in California lists or on endangered or threatened species, despite the fact that they're all declining pretty rapidly. The only exception is the long-billed curlew, which many of you may have seen on our coastlines. Those here, it's the largest shorebird in North America. It's a spectacular bird, and they depend a lot on alfalfa fields and things now. So that's the one that probably people are most concerned about.
Okay. Jim, how many sandhill cranes winter in the area?
That's a tricky question to count all these birds, but our best estimate is there's two races of sandhill crane. There's lessers and graders, and there's a special population in the Central Valley of graders, which is the same species as those you might have heard about in the Platte River in Nebraska, where there's more. There's about 30,000 greater sandhill cranes, and almost 20 to 30% of those spend the winter on Staten Island. That's how important Staten Island is. And these birds return to the same wintering spot year after year after year.
Good, that's great. Sandra, are they starting to practice regenerative farming in the Delta, which actually absorbs carbon from the atmosphere?
Great question. And that's exactly what we're trying to advance at Staten, about improving soil retention and building up carbon in the soils. We're moving to rice production, which is more carbon neutral and actually holds onto the carbon in the soil. That's in part because one of the best ways to stop subsidence and stop emissions is to keep these soils wet, just what the birds like. And we're also restoring wetlands. So very interested in that as very much a regenerative movement in the Delta.
Okay, thank you. Perry is asking, do you need to develop similar hotels along the rest of the flyway? Is there a certain distance between the rest stops that is needed to make the whole journey work?
Absolutely, great. Yeah, there are other sort of pinch points, one of which is the Klamath National Wildlife Refuge System, which is chronically in trouble because they don't have the water they need to manage the refuge, which is something we're also working on. That's a vital stopover for hundreds of thousands of birds. There are other places, for example, in Washington, the Skagit Valley in Washington, where TNC has done farming for bird programs, very similar to what I just described. That's an important place, certainly all of our coastlines, and then farther south along the way for sure.
Okay. Yvonne is asking, the presentation mainly showed cornfields. Are the rice farmers included in the bird returns project? This
Thank you. Very, very astute. Noticing this. Right. Actually, rice farmers are the majority of the farmers we've worked with. This has been done in rice so far, and we have our work cut out for us to expand it out of the rice community. In fact, the California Rice Commission is now our first example of a bird returns network hub, and they've stood up and are running their own bird returns marketplace with our assistance and Audubon's and Point Blues. So absolutely.
Diane is asking, how are you dealing with the risk of losing rental property if farmers decide to sell? Given increased development pressure in the Central Valley, what is the balance between purchasing land and preserving in perpetuity versus renting and possibly losing continuous blocks of habitat?
Yeah, you've put your thumb on one of our biggest challenges, right? Is loss of bird-friendly crops to orchards and vineyards, which are great crops, but not particularly good for these birds. And even worse, them coming out of farming altogether. And that's one of the real challenges. And so what we think is by creating programs that are adding value to the farming community that do a couple of things. One, create new revenue streams for them that make their operations more sustainable. making their farms more resilient and making production of a bird-friendly crop like rice as attractive as growing almonds or olives. I think those are the keys to sort of stem the tide of conversion and loss, among other things.
Okay. Terry, is there a similar program for the Eastern Coachella Valley Salton Sea area?
We have not brought this idea to there, and we're not very active in that part of the landscape, but it is a ripe one for that. The Imperial Valley has a lot of agriculture. Sounds like you might realize how important that place is for birds and many of these kinds of birds. Another example where Audubon is deeply invested. So it's a good example of where this could be taken for sure.
Yeah, I can say it's not exactly the Imperial Valley, but we are working through our Colorado River program to really restore the Delta and the connection to the Sea of Cortez. So that is an important place for birds as they migrate. So at least we're doing something there, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, Bruce, I understand that some areas in the Central Valley have experienced up to 20 feet of surface subsidence. Can the flooding of fields actually raise the surface level, or are these subsidences permanent?
Yeah, this is a knowledgeable group. So that subsidence is the result of the unregulated use of groundwater in the San Joaquin Valley largely, although there's some in the Sacramento Valley. And that unfortunately is permanent for the most part. The flooding in these fields won't raise the land up. The soils are actually just compacted and you can't bring it back. So that's how important it is for us to not let that sinking happen. And you're right, there are parts of the San Joaquin Valley that have sunk by well over 25 feet at this point.
Yeah. Okay, Linda, sorry to ask again, what is the best month and time of day to see the sandhill cranes performing their mating dance? I've seen them in the morning and evenings, but haven't seen them dance. So anything specifically about that?
Yeah, they're not doing a lot of dancing when they're here because they're in winter mode, but on the shoulder season, so particularly when they're getting ready to go. So right now might be a good time within the last, this month, where they're getting all excited and they're pair bonded. They generally mate for life, and so they're reinforcing their pair bond. So you'll see them dancing in some of the fields at Staten and so forth. But otherwise, you go to the breeding grounds as close as Sierra Valley, another place that we've worked hard to protect in the Sierra Nevada.
Good. And just to finer point on these things, so the Cosumnes is located south of Elk Grove before Lodi and Stockton, if anybody's curious. It's also created this wonderful buffer between those two expanding cities. So for any of you who have gone along Highway 5, you know that generally speaking, it becomes one long contiguous kind of development. And the preserve has just, it's prevented that from happening there. And these have these two wonderful rivers running through it. So it has other benefits to humans as well as wildlife. And also there's a really wonderful bat colony there that's kind of fun to watch as they come out at night. So another reason to go.
Yeah, I want to make a note here because I just saw Jim Roeth thankfully corrected me, and the Crane Festival is the first weekend in November. So I'd forgotten that. And so for those of you who are interested, it's a great event.
Okay. Let's see. Yvonne is asking, why would farmers resist being involved in the bird returns project?
Well, sometimes for very practical reasons. In other words, it's difficult to fit into their operation. Rice in particular is one of those where it's easier than others. A lot of other crops are double cropped where they have a summer crop and a winter crop. And so depending on how they're feeling about the economic value of that winter crop might change things. In other cases, they may still be suspicious of programs and big conservation NGOs who care about the birds. And so we need to do the social work of revealing for them that we're a partner and want to work with them in constructive ways that work for them as well.
Okay. Randy is asking, President Biden announced the 30 by 30 initiative, that is to protect 30% of US lands by 2030. does TNC work, does our work fit into this, and what's happening in California?
Yeah, so we have a small team dedicated to sort of assessing what 30 by 30 could look like for California, actually working with the governor's office. And we've mapped out a lot of these things, and we've got a pretty good handle because we have 5 decades of work, like looking at where the most important lands are to protect. The water landscape and the wetlands is a little more challenging. And so we're working on that right now, is like, what does freshwater conservation look like in a 30 by 30 context? And we're definitely working at the federal level too with the Biden administration and thinking about that. It's an active conversation right now.
Okay. Nancy, is Cosumnes part of the Sacramento Delta? I'm vague about the geography up there.
Yeah, the Cosumnes overlap. So the Staten Island, which is the big blob that you may have noticed on the westernmost part, that's in the Delta proper. And there's a transition point at which you're sort of outside the Delta, but the Cosumnes River Preserve, like if you went to the visitor center, that's tight. The river there is fresh water, but it's tidal. So it's having the influence of the tides from the bay. And so it's in effect the Delta.
Okay. Helen is asking, is there a problem with water supply to flood the fields during drought years?
Yes, big issue. And one of the things we're trying to figure out how to navigate that. And the expectation is that in any drought year, there'll be less habitat, but what we do and can provide will be vital. And the Sacramento Valley in particular is water rich relative to the San Joaquin Valley. And so making sure that you deliver, so a bare minimum up there in the severest of droughts, which is exactly what we did in the last drought using bird returns. And so that's going to be the key. And there are responsible ways to like substitute groundwater. So if we've done a good job of managing our groundwater, that should be both for nature and for people, our drought water supply, as long as we haven't mined it to the point where it's inaccessible like we have in some places.
Right. Okay, we are getting close to the end. I think we have time for one more question. Amy is asking, how does adding water result in food for the birds?
I'm sorry, broke up. Say that again.
How does adding water result in food for the birds?
Yes. So there's 2 kinds of food that are occurring on these farm fields. The ducks and geese are eating the leftover grains, the rice grains and corn grains and wheat grains that are left over are vital food for these birds. The shorebirds, on the other hand, and some of the ducks eat small invertebrates, little worms and other small invertebrates in the soil. And that's why they all have different length bills, because they're all getting to different kinds of things at different depths in the soil.
Okay, excellent. And I got word that we have time for one more question, so that's great. Faith is asking, is flooding possible even in severe drought years? I think we might have mentioned that still is a problem, but maybe can you say something about water rights and how some of these farmers have an abundance of water even in drought years?
Yeah, water rights in California is a big topic, but there are, quite a few farmers, particularly in the Sacramento Valley in this context, who have reasonably reliable water supplies, even in the most severe of droughts. And so those are going to be our key partners then. And like I said, moving to using groundwater in those years can be a viable option as long as you replenish them when water is abundant.
Okay.
So those are 2 ways to get at it.
Okay. Well, thank you. I know we didn't get to all the questions, but again, we will make sure that you get written responses. And I want to thank so much Rod Kelsey, who knows so much about birds and so much about our work here in California and is really driving strategies for the future for California. So thank you, Rod.
Thank you, everybody.
Great to see you. And again, visit the preserve in winter and in spring and the rest of the year. It's a wonderful place. And Rod mentioned the Sierra Valley Preserve. That is a preserve that is, I would say, in the creation stage. It's about a half an hour north of Truckee, and it's a wonderful, very transitional habitat. It's the largest montane meadow in the Sierra. And there's a lot of ranching there, and there's wonderful wetlands. So if you've not been birding there, I would definitely suggest it, especially in the springtime. And that preserve is currently run by the Feather River Land Trust, and we have been helping to add to that for them. And I know that they are going to be really building that out in the future. So it's a wonderful place to visit. Thank you so much. There's a survey coming out. Please give us your feedback about how we did. And we'd also love to hear about what other topics you'd like to hear about. And I mentioned that we have a book launch. So if you'd like to be invited to, or just receive more information about that, let us know. And then we have a wonderful Earth Day Summit coming up. Our wonderful marketing team who put this together today has been spending a great deal of time bringing together some very special speakers. So we hope that you can join us for that. And we are going to send out more information. And we encourage you to mark the day on your calendar and join us for that time. And with that, I'm going to say adieu. It's been wonderful to be here with you. We thank you so much for your support. We couldn't do what we do without you. And so please stay in touch, and we hope to see you next month. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.